Welcome back. Well, the last time we met, I told you that I was going to give you a little bit more information about this revolver right here. This is a Smith & Wesson Victory Model. It's a K-frame, 38 special, 38 Smith & Wesson special. And as you can see, it's this military and police model is rather crudely finished, very basic. It's Parkerized, no checkering on the stocks, and everything about it. It stands for war. This was produced to augment our supply of sidearms for the war effort during World War II. So how that particular revolver came into being is quite interesting. The U.S. was starting to see that we'd probably get drawn into the war in Europe. Around early 1940, things were really starting to heat up in Europe, and the Axis forces were really putting a strain on the British and the Allies in Europe. And as things became apparent that we might get drawn into hostilities, the Navy in particular, all the armed forces were assessing what they had for firearms, for armament. And the U.S. Navy concluded that they didn't have sufficient supply of 1911s to supply their sailors. So they sought to go by another route, which was to augment that supply with these Smith & Wesson revolvers. And at the same time, the British were also sustaining some shortage of sidearms, and they also sought the services of Smith & Wesson to produce revolvers for their needs. Over 590,000 Smith & Wesson 5-inch, this is a 4-inch revolver, but they ordered over 590,000, mostly in the 5-inch configuration. There were some in 6 and some in 4, but the great majority were in 5-inch configuration. And the British, they wanted to have the 38 Smith & Wesson, which was a smaller cartridge, shorter cartridge, a little bit larger in diameter, and they wanted it with a 200 grain initially, with a 200 grain lead bullet. That was later changed to a 175 grain jacketed bullet, and that particular revolver, they had, as I say, they had over 590,000 of those revolvers shipped to them. Some of those revolvers stayed in this side of the pond and were issued to various factories and places like that, where there was always the doubt of sabotage, the threat of sabotage for anything that we were producing for the war effort here in stateside. So some of those revolvers leaked out of the system by the Office of Strategic Services, and they were retained here for stateside use, and a lot of them went to resistance forces, abroad. So while the British got most of the over 590,000 that they had ordered, there were a substantial number that were diverted to other personnel and to other needs. The Navy initially purchased, the U.S. Navy that is, initially procured the Victory Model, and it's given the Victory name by virtue of the fact it has V for victory right as the prefix to the serial number. And The Navy initially desired to equip its flying personnel. You know, those who were flying off of aircraft carriers. They initially desired to equip them with 1911 45s, but very shortly into the war, it was obvious that pilots really did not want to have a cumbersome, heavy sidearm. They preferred to have a lightweight, this lightweight and more easily packed revolver. And in addition, most of them, while some of them had a hip holster that was designed for them, most of the flyers preferred to have this lightweight holster right here. And this is an authentic holster, and you can see it's got a bunch of cloth loops on it for cartridges, and this holster is in fantastic condition. Sometimes they were, carved with the pilot's name on them and things like that. But this one here is essentially as issued, in very good condition, and but pilots desired to have that gun with them in the cockpit because it was in the cramped confines of a cockpit. So that's what the Navy did. Actually, they swapped roles. So the people on board the vessels would be, in guard duties. They were equipped with the 1911s, where the pilots then took the 38 specials, and that's what ours were. Ours were all 38 specials. We had just a few of the 38 200, what they call the 38 200s, which was the 38 Smith & Wesson with a 200 grain bullet, which was later converted to the 175 grain jacketed bullet. Our bullets were 158 grain, steel cased bullets with a copper plating on them, and that owed to the fact that we were, keeping within the Hague Convention, previous agreements with the Hague Convention, where a solid lead bullet would have been considered to be prohibited in, international warfare. So the procurement of these revolvers didn't go well at first. A seldom stated but rather obvious fact is that, the war demanded virtually all of our able-bodied people, men mostly, to report for duty to go fight the war. And that stripped a lot of factories of its trained personnel, and most significantly, Smith & Wesson was no different than any other company, and they suffered a loss of their trained, qualified personnel that were heretofore making revolvers. And as I've showed you in a couple of different videos, the last one and one previously to that, the inner workings of a Smith & Wesson revolver are quite complex, and learning to build a Smith & Wesson is not something one does immediately. It's an acquired skill. It took me quite a while. I learned to be an armorer in 2 weeks, but I didn't really acquire great proficiency in the craft, for quite a while. I probably worked on my first 50 or 60 revolvers before I had certain things down pat. So that's how things went initially for the Smith & Wesson Victory Model. The initial production of those Smith & Wessons were reported to have as much as a 30% failure rate in terms of quality control. They were suffering a lot of ills. This one, as a matter of fact, has got this one's got a couple of notable problems that I addressed personally, so that I can give it back to Mike in better condition than what he lent it to me. But it has a short sear. The sear was cut too short, and as a result, it's got a catch. It's got a stub, what's called a stubber, in that double action. and while the hammer does pull back, this is not Smith and Wesson. This is not the way they come out of the factory with good quality control. We don't know whether this gun was simply one of the ones that were taken out of the quality control system. We don't know if this one was actually issued to any military unit. It is, however, marked on the top U.S. Navy, and it's on the top strap. And now a lot of these revolvers were marked on the side right here, where you have the Smith & Wesson embossing. A lot of them were marked U.S. property of U.S. Navy on the side of them. So this one here, judging by, we made about 300. We made over 352,000 of the Smith & Wesson 38 Special, and this one here is it's around 100 and it's just shy of 114,000. So this one was made in basically the first third or so of the entire production. So this would mean that, you know, this is among the ones that had some production issues, and there's a few others. There's a couple of other slight problems, but things that would not qualify as a fine firearm to package for sale. So that was just the nature of them early on, and as the workforce became more proficient, I'm sure that a great number of the workforce were women, but as they became more proficient in the basically putting these together, fitting them together, they require an awful lot of hand fitting. As they became more proficient, the guns became higher quality. So that's how things progressed from 1941 until 1945, when production ceased at the end of the war. And actually, the production for the British ceased a little bit earlier than that. They didn't finalize their last contract simply because they saw the war grinding to a halt, and so the last contract really wasn't put into effect. So they were a very substantial contribution to the war effort, especially to the U.S. Navy that their flyers used. And matter of fact, this beacon right here, this is also something that Mike gave me to show you. This is a beacon that a sailor would have worn on his vest, and it can be turned. It's waterproof, and it could have been turned on if he went into the drink so that he could be found, and or for that matter, if he had to bail out over land. It's a beacon that he could turn on so that rescuers could find him. But it's a fascinating history. It's probably a revolver that very few people are aware of, except other than people who collect things like that and are very knowledgeable. Most people think of immediately, when you talk about a sidearm for the military in World War II, your mind goes immediately to the 1911, the 1911 A1, which had a couple of design modifications with the rounded back strap, the spring cover, and also the trigger. The trigger was changed so that it was a little shorter for people who had shorter fingers. So there were some modifications that were made from, and it had a improved hammer that would not bite the hand. So people are very well aware of the 1911's history, but very few people have much knowledge about this firearm right here, and it has its own place in the history of our combat in World War II. I don't think it can be stated enough. I'm old enough that I know. I knew the people who fought in World War II. They were my parents' age. These were all people that I mean they suffered greatly in their service for the country. It's not called the greatest generation for nothing. What they saw throughout the world for 4 very miserable years is something that cannot be ever forgotten. But this particular firearm served well. It's not as well known as the 1911 45, but it served very, very well, and a lot of flyers carried this as they were on missions. And it's a gun that also was very much issued through the Office of Strategic Services to guards that protected our production facilities that were always under threat of sabotage. So it had an honorable service. As ugly a duckling as it is, this is a very highly valued gun. These fetch a price of close to $2,000, as you see them right here. So they're not as plentiful as the 1911 was. They were only made, the entire production between our production for the Navy and our services here stateside, and for the British, totaled about 50,000 less than 1 million. So that's not a huge number compared to the many firearms that were made for other purposes, but that particular handgun is a notable contribution to our history. So that's it. I thank you very much, Patreon subscribers, to your dedication and for helping me out financially. And I especially thank my buddy Mike. I'm going to leave a link at the bottom so you can, with his business address, if you're interested in this sort of firearm, this sort of collectible. I mean, this is a fantastic piece of memorabilia right here. What a collector's piece. I mean, this is a fantastic piece of history that there weren't too many of. So I'll leave Mike's information down below so that you can give him a call. He's got a lot of historic firearms, stuff that you don't find everywhere. I mean, it's stuff that you find in very few places. So if you want anything like that, give Mike a call. So thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button and hit the like button too. I really appreciate it. God bless.